Hi, my name is Pennan Brae, and I'm in here at beautiful Blue Light Studio in Vancouver, BC, and I'd just like to tell you about my 10 favorite albums. So the first album on my list is this vintage vinyl, vintage Winos compilation by Keith Richards and his second band that he had in the late 80s and the early 90s, the Vintage Winos. So this album it's like a best of the three solo albums he released, and you can see just the joy of vinyl. You know, you have the lyrics and that you can get into, and you have some nice illustrations. But if if you're a fan of the Stones, if you really like Keith Richards' rhythm style, his open G, 5-string tuning, this is a great album to get into. So that's my first album I wanted to share with you, and my second is this beauty by AC/DC, Highway to Hell, 1979. And Highway to Hell was the first album, I believe, that legendary producer Mutt Lange, he worked with the band. And this isn't an album, you can get into the joy of albums, when you listen, you digest the whole album, from songs 1 to 10. And it starts off with Highway to Hell and it ends with Night Prowler. Every song in this is really a satisfying listen. The body of work, the songwriting is just tremendous, the energy. And yeah, this closes out the 1970s, and then it leads into their next album, Back in Black, probably, I guess, their best-selling album. But this Highway to Hell just has so much raw energy with Mutt Lange's production touches. It's just fantastic. So number 3 on my list is, in no particular order, is the Eagles. Now this is their greatest hits, released I believe in 1976. I think also this is the best-selling greatest hits album of all time. And this is just from 1971 to 1975. So usually bands, when they have a greatest hits, it might be after a 2-decade period. But with the Eagles, their songwriting was so beautiful, and they're so prolific. They could release a greatest hits just from a 4-year period. You can see they've got, Take It Easy, Lion Eyes, Already Gone, Desperado, Best of My Love. Every song on this album is just a joy to listen to. And it's another great album to get into and enjoy. So next, getting into some fine art here with, of course, with the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper, released in 1967. Last year, in 2017, this was the best-selling vinyl album of the year. So 50 years on, people are still enjoying this album. It's the depth in the arrangements and the songwriting is just so stimulating. And this is a perfect example of the depth also of and the art of album covers. And when you could stare at an album cover You can read the credits on the back and see who was involved with playing what and the lyrics. But I mean, this album cover just tells so many so many stories. You can look at it a different time, every few days, and discover new things. And of course, it has that wonderful masterpiece, A Day in the Life, which is also after listening to it for many times, you can still get more and more and learn more and more from it. So just a beautiful masterpiece overall. Next, we have the architect of it all, Mr. Chuck Berry. Rhythm guitar player, songwriter, lead guitar player, lyricist. His words, maybe the finest rock and roll poet of all time too. I mean, this is a greatest hits of his. The singles off them, like from 1956, I believe, and 57, 58. They're still as fresh now. They just sound great, and the energy of this album just leaps off the needle. As they did back in the mid to late 50s. Songs like Maybelline, Memphis, Johnny B. Good, Roll Over Beethoven. It's just a great album to just listen to the birth of rock and roll and how that exploded onto the scene in the 1950s. And Chuck Berry's music, is, again, it's fresh off the shelf now, like it was back in the 1950s. Just wonderful, wonderful recordings. So jumping back to the side, we have the legendary Bob Marley, greatest hits as well. Again, opening the album cover and exploring the art and all the details and the lyrics. You can really get to learn more about the songs and the recordings. And this greatest hits album, it rounds off your music collection so well. It's such a vital part. You've got beautiful love songs like Waiting in Vain, which is one of the most intimate and lovely, touching love songs I think ever written. And of course, No Woman, No Cry, and you got more upbeat numbers like Could You Be Loved? Is This Love? Thank God for reggae music. It's such a wonderful genre, and to think for a long time there was a period when there was no reggae music, or people didn't know about it. I guess like rock and roll also. So a beautiful album to have. Next, just a rockin' band. Creedence Clearwater Revival. As a kid, I used to really enjoy listening to this from my father's album collection. And the guitar riffs that John Fogerty wrote and played and recorded, and also these songs. I think I always had a fun experience listening to CCR, and still do. Their music it's rocking, it's so upbeat, and just the songwriting. You know, they're such a unique band. Can't really compare them to anyone. They have such they've really carved out their own niche and their own sound. So just a really fun addition to anyone's music collection. Next, one of the greatest selling albums of all time, Fleetwood Mac's Rumours. Again, an album that you can listen to from song 1 to 10 and just enjoy the body of work as a whole, you know, and listening to the story unfold. And just such a wonderful American and British lineup. I mean, songs like Secondhand News, Dreams, Never Going Back Again, Don't Stop. I mean, you read every song, you know, on this album, and you know, you react to each of them. So, you know, so powerfully emotionally. They're just, the lyrics, the emotion in them. I think this was released 1977, so a wonderful snapshot of the late 70s and really great rock and roll. And last but not least, are my favorites are the Rolling Stones. And this is Beggar's Banquet, which I believe kicked off their 4 or 5 album sort of legendary period that they did with producer Jimmy Miller. I think you had Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, and then their double album Exile on Main Street. I feel like I forgot one in there, but anyways, Beggar's Banquet, I love the album cover. It's very understated to me. There's, again, you know, you can get into these album covers. You know, you can read them, find little things. It's just kind of like a riddle or a maze or a puzzle. You know, you find different little tidbits of information that you know might amuse you. I love this 1968. This Beggar's Banquet, you know, which is the album. This album, to me, anyways, it just kicks off another level of the Stones, you know, in their long musical history. You know, you've got well-known tracks, legendary tracks like "Sympathy for the Devil" and "Street Fightin' Man," but you've also got gems that you know, even real good listeners of the Stones, you know, like you don't hear that often, like "Jigsaw Puzzle," which is such an interesting song. "No Expectations," Parachute Woman, and also "Salt of the Earth," you know, which is such an interesting track. I think that's one of the earliest, could be the earliest, with Keith Richards on lead vocals. So this album is really satisfying, I find also. So I thank you for listening and for allowing me to share 10 of my favorite albums. I could have brought 30 more that I really enjoy listening to. So thanks very much. Cheers.